Hi, everyone. So today we're going to discuss filing, sanding, and buffing. So when you have completed cutting out your shape out of metal, what you have left is you have a little medallion or a little piece of metal. And most of you are going to have paper on one side. What we want to do, first of all, is we can start removing the paper. You'll get some residue left over from the paper, and that's okay because we're going to end up sanding and filing, and it will help take care of it. But you can remove the paper. And then what we want to do is we want to find our files. Your files are going to look like this. There is one that I like in particular, but they're actually all meant for, because they're different shapes and sizes. They're meant for different areas of different filing jobs that you may have. In fact, sometimes when you're using files, they're really large. We tend to use the large ones more for the outside of the medallion, but you have files. However, like I mentioned before, there is one that I prefer, and it is this one right here. And the reason I prefer it is flat on one side, and then it is slightly domed on the other. And so it allows me to get to a lot of things without having to swap back and forth with my files as often. But there's no real reason other than laziness to not swap files, because depending on where it is on the particular project that I am sanding, you can see that this particular file will not get into all the little creases and holes that I need it to. So I definitely want to make sure that I am choosing the file that will best fit the job, but it is still my favorite. Also, are going to discuss buffing. And so I'm just wanting you to kind of get your supplies in order. And so in order to get your supplies in order, you're going to need a buffer. Now, there are larger buffers that we use inside the classroom, but if we're outside the classroom or we're sitting at a desk, we would use just a little hand buffer like this. And we want to put kind of a fluffy little buffing pad in there. Now, in order to put this in there, if it's not already in, what you would do is you would push down on this little lever and you would turn the little silver knob. And what it does when you turn that is it opens up a set of teeth that are in there, so that you can put in a bit or take a bit out. Now, if you go to put a bit in there and it turns out it won't fit, either it is too small and so the little teeth won't grab it, or it's too big, then you need to replace the little chuck piece inside, which is going to be right here. You open it up and inside there is a little copper piece. And it has different holes. So that little hole right there, there's 3 different sizes. So you would want to find one that is appropriate for your job. And all you have to do is kind of line it up and go, okay, that's close. It'll probably fit. And then once you've done that, you put this silver piece back on, tighten it down, but you don't tighten it really tight. If you start cranking on this, what happens is you break the little piece inside and it doesn't work any longer. So you want to make sure that you slide this guy in here and then you tighten it, and again, not overly tightening it. You just want to make sure it's kind of snug. And then you release that little lever. And so now what happens is it's in there, it's not going to fall out, and I would be ready to buff when it is time. And buffing is how we get the metal to a high shine. Now, the other thing that we use in order to get our metal to a high shine is we use a buffing compound. It has a little bit of wax and a little bit of grit in there. And so in the beginning, when you start buffing, it kind of does the final bit of sanding for you. And then once that sanding is done, it's smoothing out the metal. And then it starts to get to a nice shine, and you'll see that in a moment. But in order to do the filing and the buffing and the sanding, you need one more thing. I forgot sandpaper. So in sandpaper, we generally use 4 different pieces of sandpaper. So you want to get that ready as well. And so in your box, you should have a 220. And generally it's written on the back. That is how you know it's going to be a 220. And it is going to be the roughest sandpaper you have. The next one you're going to have is a 320, again, written on the back, and it's still going to be rough, but not as rough as the 220. And then we're going to move up to a 400, and the 400 is going to start to become really smooth. In fact, you're going to begin to be convinced that it's not even sandpaper. So it's pretty smooth. And then the last one is going to be the 600. When you're using the 600, you're going to feel like it's just paper. It doesn't feel rough to the touch whatsoever. So just keep that in mind. So remember, the lower the number, the grittier the sandpaper, meaning the bumpier it is. The higher the number, the smoother it is, and the better finish you're going to have in the end. When we go into the slideshow, what you're going to see is this right here. So the first thing is directions. For those of you that really love directions written out, it is right here. At the base of this, I'm going to end up putting in this video. So this video is going to be in here as well, so that if you are not somebody that loves to read every detail, you can watch the video instead. And then the next slide just shows you what the files look like. So here are our files. And again, I told you there's some larger files. So that would be one of our larger files. And this is a hopefully really rough example. Hopefully yours after cutting it looks better than this. But what we want to do is we want to get rid of all these ridges. So anything that is not nice and smooth, we are going to file down. So that is the fastest way to get rid of that material, other than cutting it correctly the first time. And so we're going to file down these pieces. This would be kind of representing those really rough high spots. And the first thing we want to do is we want to file down the mountains or ridges and bring them down. If you were to take your file and just go all the way across, what happens is you're actually reinforcing the ridges and the mountains that are there. So you want to make sure that you're just filing the top of this. And I'll show you what I mean in a moment. And you do it until it starts to get more smooth. So it should look a little more like this. There's an example. So after you have watched the video or read the information, and if you are not somebody that wants to have to go, oh, let me go watch it again, this slide will just assist you with that. So there's what it should look like. And this is what it should be closer to. So it should go from that other really bad bumpy piece to this. Now, when you first start to do this, it takes a little while. But the reason it generally takes a little while is because you are not focused. So if you were to take a look at your piece, really identify those pieces that are really tall and that you need to go after really fast, and only file those go down really, really quickly. Where if you're just going across and then reinforcing it, it takes a long time. So you want to just kind of, focus on it, do that one spot, turn it, do the next spot, all the way around, and it'll go pretty quickly. And after it is smooth and you don't have any of those weird ridges, then what you're going to do is you're going to start to sand. So again, when we sand, we have the 220, the 320, the 400, and then the 600. And look at the back of your paper. And this is what it kind of looks like of the sandpaper, but we're trying to sand down really quickly in the beginning. And then as it's starting to get smoother, then we need finer sandpaper. And this is actually how it kind of looks when you're looking at the sandpaper straight on. So in order to sand, I did it on a regular piece of metal, but I want you to know that normally this would be on your medallion that you've cut out. But when you begin to sand, you want to sand all in one direction. Now, the reason you want to sand all in one direction is because it is easier to see if you have scratches going in any other direction. What you do is after you finish sanding in one direction, you're going to take it over to a light source, put it in the light source and kind of move it around. And it's going to show you and it's going to kind of highlight if you have scratches going in any other direction. So you can see right here that I had sanded one way, and then as I was sanding the other, you can see those scratches. If you don't get rid of those scratches when you were using, let's say, the 220 sandpaper, and you had scratches in it already, if you don't get rid of those scratches that are going in a different direction with your 220 sandpaper, that means they're still lower than the metal surface. And so as you continue, they will start to become more prominent. So as everything else becomes smooth and shiny, those scratches now stand out like a sore thumb. So you want to make sure when you're working with your sandpaper, you finish getting rid of all these scratches before moving on to your next sandpaper. And you can tell that just by these that I go in one direction with one sandpaper. And so I'll do 220, I'll get 220 going all the way in one direction. And then I'm going to end up reversing the direction of my sandpaper as I move up in sandpaper. So when I go to my 320, I'm going to reverse the direction that I'm sanding. And the reason for that is it becomes very apparent when this starts to look nice. And you can start to see that there are very few scratches. There's a few down here still, but you can see when those original scratches start to disappear. And since you can see when they start to disappear, you know when it's time to move on. Every time we switch to a new sandpaper, what I want you to notice is how much smoother the metal looks. So if we go back to that first one, you can see how everything is rough. It's almost like we put new scratches that may not even been there, which sometimes is the case. And then as we move up into the sandpaper, you can see it's starting to look a little bit more smooth, not quite as rough. And then we're going to go into our 400. So this is at our 400. So you can see it's starting to look pretty good. There's still some scratches going in the other direction, but it's starting to look pretty good. And by the time you get to your 600 and you've finished all the way through, what you're going to notice is the surface going to look satiny. It's going to be really pretty. It's almost a little shiny. You can see minor scratches and minor flaws, and those are the ones that we're going to buff out. That is the reason that we use the buffing compound that has just a little teeny bit of grit to it. It is to get rid of those final scratches and then start to shine everything up. And this is what that looks like. So this is somebody that is polishing. I do want you to take a little bit of notice how everything is kind of turning black. Now, the reason it's turning black is because that is the buffing compound mixing with the oxidation that has corroded your metal. So anytime your metal is set out and the air touches it, it starts to corrode and it becomes oxidized. So the oxygen touches the surface, it dirties it up just a little bit. And then when we take the wax and we start buffing it off, the wax is starting to mix with the oxidation. So the little crust on the surface that you can't really see. And then it turns black originally, and then instantly it starts to shine up. So you're going to see that when you're working with it. And then you can see by the time you're done, it looks shiny. Now, if we're using our big polishers at the school, it gets really, really shiny, like a high polish. These little ones, they'll polish it, but it's not quite to the same degree as the ones at school. But you would just kind of go back and forth and polish and use a little bit more wax and then polish. And then when you're all done, the final part to your project is going to be to turn it into a finished work of art. So having a medallion just like this, that's not good enough. Like, what would you do with this thing? What we need to do is we need to turn it into something. We can turn it into a keychain. We can turn them into earrings. We can do a lot of different ideas. And that is going to be kind of up to you and your personal choice. So I personally don't actually wear a lot of jewelry. I have my wedding ring and I have earrings, and that is pretty much all I wear. However, if you are somebody that does wear more jewelry, then you would create jewelry that you would wear. If you are somebody that doesn't wear jewelry, you would want to make sure that you're creating something that is still useful to you. So sometimes people will take these and they will like hang it in their rearview mirror of the car, or they'll put it on a keychain, or they'll give it to a friend. And so you can do any of those things, but whatever you turn it into, it needs to be finished. So just putting a chain on it and calling it done is not good enough for a jewelry class. So you make sure that you're kind of thinking about how you want it to look, and you want to make sure that you like it. So the kind of rule of thumb is you either have to like it and be willing to wear it in public, or you would be willing to let your bestie wear it in public without trying to make them look silly, because that's not cool. So you make sure that you are doing a good job as far as creating the design that you would be proud to show off. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to get started. So I'm going to swap cameras. There we go. So you see my bench pin here. When I'm getting ready to file, I will generally have my medallion, and it'll sit up just like this. And so I have it in the crook, and it allows me to focus on one section and file. Files actually only file in one direction. Most people will go back and forth, but it actually is only doing the job as it travels in one direction. So I would look and identify where my little bumps are and then go across them. And I would just go like that. And it's okay if you go back and forth, but you're just going to hit just that spot. And what I want you to keep in mind is when we're doing it, when we're filing, if this is the edge of your piece, this is what we're going for, but maybe yours looks a little like this one right here. And so what we're trying to do again is we're trying to get rid of those high spots so that when we are filing, it is smooth. And so I put mine right here. I identify all the spots that are high. I go across them. And if I go across them and I'm looking at them, it will actually file out pretty quickly. It generally takes just 1 or 2 passes. If yours is really like a really high mountain, then it might take you a little bit longer, but so you can see that most of mine is done. It looks pretty good. I have a couple spots, but now I'm close enough that I can now go across it and I'm not going to be reinforcing anything. So I'm just going around, but what I am looking for, and I don't know if you can see, is that when you're doing it, the edges start to become shiny. And the shiny edge tells you that you have filed that space. So if you haven't filed that space, chances are you still have a little divot across it. So you're just kind of making sure that across the edge, everything is shiny as you're going around one last time to make sure that it is all smooth. Now, this would also be the time that if you have a shape that you don't particularly care for because you were cutting, you can file it down in that area so that it would get rid of that shape. So this is where I'm using my rounded edge right here because I want to keep that inside piece rounded. You can see my dog. She thinks it's dinner time. It's not, but she thinks it is. Go lie down, please. Out of the camera shot. Go lie down, please. Go. No. Go. You're interrupting my video. Listen, you little star. No. Now to do this part of the job, it normally would take me, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes to do that part of it. And mine looks pretty good. It's going to take you guys probably an entire class period to be able to get this part accomplished, only because you haven't done it. Yours is going to be a little bit rougher than mine, but I'm happy with mine. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my sandpaper. Now, remember, when we're doing sandpaper, what we're trying to fix is any scratches that might be in the metal surface. And when I'm talking metal surface, I'm talking this right here. So if we were to turn it sideways and we had a magnifying glass, what we could see is that the metal surface is not perfect. And every one of these is a little scratch in the surface. And so what we're going to do is we're going to sand across that using the 220 sandpaper because it'll go quick. And what we need to do is we need to sand right down past those scratches. So we're going to keep sanding until there are no more scratches that we can see in any other direction. And this would become our new surface right there. However, in truth, what you would notice is if you were looking at that new surface, is there would still be scratches. They're just smaller, and they were actually caused more from the sandpaper that we used. So they would be littler, but they would be the 220 grit. And so we want to make sure that we would sand that all off. So if my piece of metal is like this, after I use my 220 and I have this size scratches, I would want to make sure that I go back through and I sand. But that time I would be using the 320. And as you probably guessed, there would still be scratches. They would just be even more minor than the last scratches. And then I would need to sand through those as well. And that's when I would move up to my 400. And then as you guessed, there would be scratches, but they would be even littler than that last set. So every time we do it, we're actually taking care of the scratches we put in it using the last bit of sandpaper that we had. And then even with the 600, there are small little scratches. So we would just make sure that we do our 600 after that. Okay, so now I would take a look at my sandpaper, find my 220, and then when I'm holding it, I will generally hold half of my metal. And then I make sure that as I'm going through, I go pretty quickly. And that's because I hate sanding. Like, it is, filing and sanding are no fun. I'd rather do honestly, the cutting or the designing. So if I go slow, I can make it last a really long time. So sometimes when you guys, especially if you hate it in the beginning, you take a long time, and it can take you days to do this. Or if you make sure that you are holding it in your hand. Now, the reason you hold it in your hand is if you put it down, what you're doing is you're actually scratching the back side of it. And if you hold it this way and try and do it because you think you're doing more at one time, what you're actually doing is you're only sanding sections of this, because when you're using your hand, it actually pushes into any of the minor grooves in your metal. So anyway, I go quickly because I don't want to have to do this very long. And so I know, and I figured out that if I just do it at about this speed, that one, I get a little bit of burn with my muscle, and that's probably a good thing for me. And then two, it takes care of it really quickly. So you can see now that when I'm looking at it, that it looks good on one side, but it's still kind of rough on the other. So now I just flop it over and I do the same thing going the opposite direction. I mean, in the same direction, sorry. Now, after you get it so that it looks good, remember you want to bring it into a light source and turn it. And you can kind of see there, you can see the scratches, they're all heading in one direction and they look pretty good. So as I turn it, but what I can see is there's a little one right here. So I'm going to hit that one more time. Okay. And then I'm going to move up to my 320. Now, I was just sanding in this direction. So now I'm going to change directions and I'm going to sand across my little squirrel here. And remember, that is so that when I am sanding, I can see when all the scratches that I just put into my piece are gone. Kind of see the scratches and how they're all heading in that new direction. Okay, so take it over to a light source, verify you see nothing going in the wrong direction. And then we would go up to our 400, and now we're going back into our original direction. So I'm going from his head to his toes again. And the one that should really, really take you the longest is the 220, because you're getting out any deep scratches, and then the 320. Everything else goes pretty quick after that, I think. But those first two, it's because there were scratches in there that your sandpaper did not create. What I want you to notice is it's starting to get harder to see where those scratches are. You can kind of see them there, but they're getting finer as I go through, which is good. Okay, so now I'm on to my last one, my 600. And I'm going to go the opposite direction of the direction I was just going. You can see it's pretty velvety now. Okay, and so then I would do the same thing on the back side as well. I'd go back to the 220, which will take off the sandpaper pretty quickly. I'm not going to do mine for two reasons. One, because you don't want to sit there and wait for me to do the other side. And then two, I still need this piece as a demonstration piece. And so if I do both sides, then it's hard to demo with it. But you can see it looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the way it is looking. And so now I would get ready to start buffing it. So remember, when we're buffing, we want to make sure we have a nice soft wheel. And then we have our wax. Now, if you're using buffing compound on a regular basis, you would definitely want to wear a mask. If you were doing manufacturing work, you would want to wear a mask. For the most part, it's going to be pretty minor what we're doing. But if we're using our big buffers in the classroom, we make sure that we're not using an overabundance of wax so that it doesn't get airborne. So you're going to just run it across the wax. You get a little bit of wax on the surface, and then we're going to start going across the metal. And what I do want you to notice is it's starting to turn black, like we talked about. What I would do is I would get a little bit more wax. And then go back over it. First it turns black. And there you can see I'm starting to get my shine in. So I do want you to see is that some of the really minor scratches start to come out at some point in time. And so if your scratches start to come out any more aggressively than what mine currently are, then you would step back, you would do the 600 one more time, and then you would go back through. Mine, if I continue using a little bit of the polish, that's going to go away. So just kind of keep that in mind. If yours doesn't start to go away fairly quickly, then you're going to want to go back into lower sandpaper. Okay, so you can see it's nice and shiny. And then I have this yellow rag, and I'm going to be able to go back over it. And then it's going to be that much shinier. So you can see